स्टार्ट करें। Good afternoon to all of you. This is Preeti Sagar and welcome back to the editorial discussion. So today I have taken all such important topic which were there in the discussion last week. So first article that is regarding intellectual property waiver. Okay, so TRIPS waiver is useful but not a magic pill. US supported move will have an effect if countries simultaneously address non-IP bottlenecks among other things. Basically, this article is about waiving of intellectual property rights from COVID-19 vaccination, on which Western countries have created it. So Western countries are having their intellectual property rights. So just to provide these vaccination free of cost or at the lesser cost to the public in different countries, so waiving of intellectual property right is required. So this article is talking about that we should not focus on waiving of intellectual property right, rather we should focus on non-intellectual property rights or non-IP bottlenecks. Okay, so what are these all about? We'll discuss about that. So context is that United States finally relented and declared its support for a temporary waiver of trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights agreement for COVID-19 vaccines at the WTO. In October 2020, India and South Africa at WTO proposed waiving sections 1, 4, 5, and 7 of Part 2 of the TRIPS agreement that covers copyrights, industrial designs, patents, and disclosed trade information which relates to the prevention, containment, or treatment of COVID-19. Basically, India and South Africa were two countries who fought for the cause or who put their idea before WTO to waive off intellectual property rights from the COVID-19 vaccination. So that manufacturing of these vaccinations can be drive out in different countries. So here, so they proposed this idea so that this intellectual property can be removed, okay, or can be waived. So here they are talking about the section under which this waive off can be initiated and that is under section, and these sections are related to trades or TRIPS agreement, okay, that talks about copyrights, industrial designs, patents, and disclosed trade information regarding any material. Okay, so US has supported this. Okay, US has supported the cause which has been initiated by India and South Africa. So what is the cause? Cause is to waive off intellectual property right from the COVID-19 vaccination. So US's support of the TRIPS waiver is a significant step forward in the global fight against the pandemic, and US's decisions would cause other holdouts like Canada and European Union to give up their opposition. So US has supported, and by seeing USA, Canada, and European Union is also going to do this. Legally, waiver is surely possible since Article 9 of the WTO agreement, which allows for waiving obligations in exceptional circumstances, which COVID-19 pandemic undoubtedly is. So here on the legal side, it is saying that waiving or waiver is possible as per the Article 9 of WTO, which is allowing waiving obligations under exceptional circumstances. So here they are saying this waiving off cannot be done under exceptional circumstances, which is mentioned in the Article 9 of the agreement, because COVID-19 is not an exceptional circumstance. So stumbling block is the political will of the richer countries that house the giant pharmaceutical corporations producing COVID-19 vaccines and medicines. So here stumbling block of waiving off IPR from vaccination is those countries who are holding or who are having larger or bigger pharmaceutical companies who has done research and development for the production of vaccines or medications for COVID-19. So USA's decision is a welcome step in this situation. So USA's decision is welcomed, and devil would be in the details. Countries would now negotiate on the text of the waiver at WTO. If experience of negotiating such waivers, especially on TRIPS, were anything to go by, it would be too early to celebrate. In the aftermath of HIV/AIDS crisis in Africa in 1990s, WTO adopted a decision in 2003 waiving certain TRIPS obligations to increase the accessibility of medicines in countries that lacked manufacturing capability. So during HIV/AIDS crisis, came in Africa in 1990s, WTO adopted a decision in 2003 under which certain IPR or TRIPS obligations had been waived. Okay, so that accessibility of medicines can be increased. And how it can be increased, because these countries or African countries were lacking in manufacturing capacity. So by waiving off these IPR from those medicines, now country would be able to manufacture by their own, and that will be available. After manufacturing, these medicines will be available at free of cost or at lesser cost. So specifically, obligations contained in Article 31F of the TRIPS that medicines produced under a compulsory license are predominantly for the domestic market of that country was waived, paving the way for the export of such medicines to a country that lacked manufacturing capacity. However, this waiver, later incorporated as Article 31B is in the TRIPS agreement, was subject to several stringent requirements like drugs, so manufactured are to be exported to the nation only. Medicines should be easily identifiable through different colors or shape. Only the amount necessary to meet the requirements of the importing country are to be manufactured. Importing country has to notify to the WTO, TRIPS Council, etc. So if waiver get which had been incorporated under Article 31 on the TRIPS agreement. So if it is subject to several stringent requirements like drugs that has to be manufactured, and after manufacturing it has to be exported to that country only. Okay, it means if India has permitted to waive off, it means if India is on what say as per the India's request, if IPR has been waived off from any COVID vaccine, so India can manufacture only for its nation. It cannot export to other nation. Medicine should be requirement. Sorry, medicine should be easily identifiable through color. It means it identification or identification of the medicine should be visible, should be easier, or shape should be easier. So only amount necessary to meet the requirement of the importing country for the manufacturing that the importing country has to notify to the WTO TRIPS Council. Okay, so given these cumbersome requirements, hardly any country in the last 17 years made effective use of this waiver. So statement issued by the Kedrin Tai, that is US Trade Representative, states that the negotiations on the text of the waiver will take time given the WTO's consensus-based decision-making process and the complexity of the issues involved. So this signals that negotiations on the waiver are going to be difficult, and USA would not like to be seen as blocking the TRIPS waiver and attracting the ire of the global community, making no mistake that it would resolutely defend the interest of its pharmaceutical corporations. It means the USA is in favor of waiving off. Okay, so it will not be seen as blocking the TRIPS waiver, and it will attract the ire of the global community, support of the global community. So in that situation, it would make no mistakes that it would resolutely defend the interest of its pharmaceutical corporations. Developing world should be conscious to ensure that a repeat of 2003 does not happen. And as per Thai's statement, also reveals that US supports waiving intellectual property protections on COVID-19 vaccines. So India and South Africa, who proposed a waiver not just on vaccines but also on medicines and other therapeutics and technologies which relates to the treatment of COVID-19. So USA has already narrowed down the scope of the waiver, which is considerably by restricting it to the vaccines. It means USA has supported this cause of India and South Africa to remove or to waive off IPR from vaccines only, not on therapeutic or technologies or medicines. Medicines useful in treating COVID-19 and other therapeutics must also include in the waiver. So while TRIPS waiver could lift the legal restrictions on manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines, it would not solve the problem of the lack of access to the technological know-how related manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines. So here what they are saying, as TRIPS waiver would not would lift the legal restrictions on the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines, then it would not solve the problem. What is the problem? Problem of lacking of access to the technological know-how related to manufacturing COVID-19 vaccines. Waive off had been done, but it is of no use when you do not know what is the technology has to be used for the manufacturing of those vaccines. So waiving IP protection does not impose a legal requirement on pharmaceutical companies to transfer or share technology. It means companies, they will waive, waiving IP can be done. Okay, but if companies or pharmaceutical companies would not share technology, then there is no legal obligations on them. So while individual countries may accept coercive legal measures for a forced transfer of technology, if it would be too draconian and counterproductive. So if waiving off we are talking about, along with this, there must be some coercive legal measures so that after waiving off, these companies can be forced to transfer technology. Okay, so just to prevent it from draconian and counterproductive. So therefore governments would have to be proactive in negotiating and cajoling pharmaceutical companies to transfer technology which uses various legal and policy tools including financial incentives. So finally, while TRIPS waiver would enable countries to escape WTO obligations, it will not change the nature of domestic IP regulations. So if a global IP can be waived off, but domestic IP negotiations cannot be waived off, it will not change the nature of it. So therefore, countries should start working towards making suitable changes in their domestic legal framework to operationalize and enforce the TRIPS waiver. In this regard, Indian government should immediately put in place a team of the best IP lawyers who could study the various TRIPS waiver scenarios and accordingly recommend the changes to be made in the Indian legal framework. Notwithstanding the usefulness of the TRIPS waiver, it is not a magic pill. It would work well only if countries simultaneously address the non-IP bottlenecks like technology transfers, production constraints, and other logistical challenges like inadequacy of supply chains and unavailability of raw materials to manufacturing vaccines and medicines. Then only we can think of reaching out or driving out these vaccination to reach each and every people in the country. So here, waiving of intellectual property right is not the only solution, but the solution is to remove bottlenecks from non-IP matters. Okay, so non-IP bottlenecks that need to be removed, like technology transfers, like production constraints, like logistics challenges, and inadequacy in supply chains and vulnerability of raw materials. Okay, so by solving this, then we would be able to produce more and more vaccines and provide it to the people in the country. Okay, so that was all about this article. Now, next article is about back in the shortage economy. India has recovered from extremely trying crisis in the past and with sincere and competent leadership. So, just a moment. So context is that we have been witnessing shortages of almost everything that is required to treat COVID-19 patients: hospital beds, drugs, ventilators, and oxygen, because oxygen shortage was there in the news. So world has taken note and offers of help that have came from USA, UK, European Union, and China as well. So India is once again the focus of global attention as it was in mid-1960s, when 2 consecutive years of drought resulted in a severe shortage of food. Then India had to turn to the US for assistance. This did arrive, but grudgingly, for India had not supported the West during the Cold War. The lore is that President Lyndon Johnson had directed send food to India by the shipload so that she is kept on a short lease. Okay, so here this article, what is the context? Context is that we have taken help from USA when we required. Okay, but we refused our help to USA when USA required. Okay, so article is back in the shortage economy. India has recovered from extremely trying crisis in the past with sincere and competent leadership. So sincere and competent leadership is required to face and recover extreme crisis what we had faced in the past and what we are going to face in the future and present. Okay, so there were some moments in the history when India needed help from USA. So though that moment in our history is not a happy memory, that of the response of the countries, the leadership is inspiring. Like Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri, Indira Gandhi, and their cabinet colleagues, they stirred the scientific and bureaucratic communities to bring about a quantum leap in the food production. And that was achieved with a few years. No one imagined that India, that a byword for a basket case, would be able to feed itself. That type of food insecurity India had faced during 1960s, when world they thought that India is not going to recover from it now. But Green Revolution stands out in the Indian history as a display of extraordinary accountability by the political leadership by combining resolve, humility, and intelligence. And we crucially, we are missing it today. Okay, so as we did by introducing green revolution in the country, we recovered from insecurity, we became food secured country, then we and how much food security was there in the country as we were able to keep our buffer stock which we were lacking earlier. So that was with the help of USA. So that displays an extraordinary accountability by political leadership, combining resolve, humility, and intelligence. So all such combinations was there. Okay, but we are missing it. Crucially, we are missing it today. That leadership. So lessons from the past. So unlike the 2 years of drought that tipped the country into food shortages in the mid 60s, the need for ramping up the health infrastructure could have been anticipated in March 2020, when a lockdown was announced at a very short notice. In fact, medical case for a lockdown was that it would slow the spread of the disease by avoiding overwhelming the health system and giving time to strengthen the capacity of the health system. So lessons from the Green Revolution is that India has recovered from extremely trying crisis under the most adverse of circumstances in the past. And it is entirely possible to replicate this now, but we need sincere and competent leadership. In many ways, the task is far easier today. Now, India has something that it lacked during mid-16s. For example, industrial muscle. It should not be too difficult to ramp up hospital beds, ventilators, and oxygen supply within a reasonable time. It means it is possible for India. Certain parts of the country actually have a surplus of oxygen that should give confidence on this score. So an additional feature today, again in the contrast to the mid-60s, is the considerable foreign exchange reserve. So therefore, some crucial medical inputs can be imported like vaccines, but it is extremely important to recognize that these measures are absolutely necessary. So we should not adopt an ostrich-like posture denying shortages, which central government is displaying on the issue of vaccines in particular. So we should not, what say, adopt this behavior. Okay, we should accept. Yes, we are shorting in vaccination, but we are doing it to get it as soon as possible. So here, competent leadership is required basically. So interstate variations in the death rate in India is directly related to the extent of health spending in relation to the state domestic product. And it is also related to health infrastructure, but less strongly. That is also the true for COVID-19 related deaths across South Asia. So to avert a health crisis in the future, states would have to raise the level of spending on health very substantially. On an average, states spend only around 5% of their total expenditure on health. So should we be surprised at the shortages what we are facing right now? So finally, even as we struggle against the health emergency, a shortage that we should do everything to avoid is with respect to food. food prices that has shot up from April 2020, and it suggests that there may have been a disruption of supply because of lockdown. It would be advisable to anticipate a similar disruption that follows state level lockdowns now and take all possible measures to assure the supply chain. Kharif operations are set to commence as agricultural activity takes place at the level of the states. Prime Minister Narendra Modi needs to interact closely with their leaders and the farming community. So this is abiding lessons from the mid 60s, what we as a nation were in a similar place. So that is all about this article. Now, next article is about decoding inequality in a digital world. Technological changes in education and health are worsening inequalities. So here, inequality, which is propounding in the digital world, this article is talking about. So technological changes in education and health has worsened these inequalities. Okay, what all these all about? We'll discuss about that. So context of this article is that Virginia Eubank's widely acclaimed book, that is Automatic Inequality, that alerted us to the ways that automated decision-making tools exacerbated inequalities, like by raising the barriers for people to receive services they are entitled to. Novel coronavirus pandemic has accelerated the use of digital technologies in India, even for essential services like health and education, where access to them might be poor. It means many people they can access it, but many people they cannot. Okay, so division has been created. So increasing or increased economic inequality. So economic inequality that has increased people whose jobs and salaries are protected and they face no economic fallout. Super rich, they have been even become richer. Okay, for example, Adani, their net worth has increased during pandemic. Bulk of Indian population, they are still suffering huge economic setback. Many people, they have come down below poverty line. So several surveys that conducted over past 12 months, which suggest widespread job losses and income shocks among those who did not lose jobs. So worse than the immediate economic setback is that well-recognized channels of economic and social mobility, like education and health, are getting rejigged in ways that make access more inequitable in an already unequal society. So already we were living in an unequal society, but because of this digital divide, this division, this inequality has widened up. So for a few, switch to online education has been seamless. But notwithstanding the education minister's statement in parliament that no one had been deprived of education because of online learning, at least two young students took their own lives because they could not cope. A college student studying in Delhi and a 16-year-old in Goa whose family could not afford to repair the phone he used. So according to National Sample Survey data from 2017, only 6% rural households and 25% urban households have a computer. So this division is such a wider one. Access to internet facilities is not universal either. 17% in rural areas and 42% in urban areas. So smartphones with data will have improved access over the past 4 years. A significant number of the most vulnerable are struggling. Surveys by National Council of Education Research and Training, Azim Premji Foundation, Acer, and Oxfam suggest that between 27% and 60% could not access online classes for a range of reasons like lack of devices, shared devices, inability to buy data packs, etc. So these are those limitations which are limiting people to use these services online. So further, lack of stable connectivity jeopardizes their evaluations, like imagining the internet going off for 2 minutes during a timed exam. Then what would happen? Stable connectivity would be lost. So besides this, many lack a learning environment at home. A quiet space to study is luxury for many. For instance, 25% Indians, they are living in single room dwellings in 2017 to 19. If between 2 and 4 people share a single room, how can a child study? For girls, there is an additional expectation that they will contribute to domestic chores if they are at home. So peer learning has also been suffered when students who did not study in English medium schools come to colleges where English is the medium of instruction, so they struggle. Yet, surrounded by English speakers, however falteringly, many manage to pick up the language. Such students have been robbed of this opportunity due to online education. So, while we have kept a semblance of uninterrupted education, the fact is that the privileged are getting ahead, not necessarily because they are smarter, but because of the privileges they have enjoyed and they are enjoying. So this kind of divisions we can see in the education sector. Now, digital health services, if we talk about. So something similar is happening with the healthcare. India's abysmally low public spending on health, that is barely 1% of GDP, and it bears repetition. Partly as a result, the share of out-of-pocket health expenditure of total health spending in India was over 60% in 2018. And even in highly privatized health system like US, out-of-pocket expenditure was nearly 10%. But both put the poor at a disadvantage in accessing good health care. Right now, focus is on the shortage of essentials like drugs, hospital beds, oxygen, vaccines. In several instances, developing an app that is being seen as a solution for allocation of various health services. It is assumed that these will work because of people's experience with platforms like Zomato or Swiggy and Uber Ola. So we forget that those work reasonably well because restaurants or food and taxis drivers are available for these platforms to allocate effectively. Patients are being charged whatever hospitals like, and a black market has developed for scarce services like oxygen. Sensible response to such corrupt practices would be to clamp down on the handful who indulge in them. Instead, those in power are looking for digital options like making Aadhaar mandatory. Digital solutions create additional bureaucracy for all the sick persons in the search of these device services without disciplining the culprits. So, along with the paperwork, patients will have to navigate digital work, platform and app based solutions that can exclude the poor entirely, or it will squeeze their access to scarce health services further. So, in the other spheres like vaccinations, too, digital technologies are creating extra hurdles, like use of COVID portal to book a slot that makes it much harder for those without phones, computers, and internet. So, there are reports of techies hogging slots because they know how to work the app. The website is only available in English. Then, this is also another problem to visit those websites. So, then another problem that is about exploitation of people's data. So it is also alarming if the pandemic is being used to create an infrastructure for future exploitation of people's data. Digital Health ID project is being pushed during the pandemic when its merit cannot be adequately debated. Electronic and interoperable health records are the purported benefits. For patients, interoperability, that is, if you do not have to lug your x-rays, past medication, and investigations, that can be achieved by decentralizing digital storage, like on smart cards, as France and Taiwan have done. Yet, Indian government is intent on creating a centralized database, given that we lack a data privacy law in India, and it is very likely that our health records will end up with private entities without our consent, even weaponized against us. Example, private insurance companies, they may use it to deny poor people as insurance policy or charge a higher premium. So there are worries that government is using the vaccination drive to populate digital health ID database. Like for instance, when people use Aadhaar to register on COVID, and no one is asking these questions because everyone is desperate to get vaccinated, the government is taking advantage of this desperation. So lots of loopholes people are facing, but people are not questioning government because people are so desperate that whatever it is, they could get vaccine, okay, or they could get vaccinated themselves. So there are lots of loopholes in education, lots of issues we were facing and we are facing, like if we see these issues on the name of gender, okay, sexist issues, we can see girls, they have to involve in the household chores along with studies. Students, if they are living in a poor family, they are sharing only one room, then it is very difficult for those students to study in seclusion. So lots of things are there. Then on the front of health, people, they do not have application or access to applications. They cannot, they do not have access to COVID because they do not have phones, they do not have the computer or internet. Then what they will do, how they will get vaccinated. So too many problems people are facing, India is facing. So there is need to improve digital healthcare. The point is simple: unless health expenditure on basic health services like ward staff, nurses, doctors, laboratory technicians, medicines, beds, oxygen ventilators is increased, apps like Arogya Setu, Aadhaar, and digital health IDs can improve a little. So first we need to improve the health expenditure on basic health services. Then we can think of digital health IDs. So unless laws against medical malpractices are enforced strictly, digital solutions will obfuscate and distract us from the real problem. We need political, not technocratic solutions. More than 10 years ago, we failed to heed warnings that have subsequently came true, but exclusions from welfare because of Aadhaar. Today, there is greater understanding that the harms from Aadhaar and its cousins fail disproportionately on the vulnerable. Hopefully, the pandemic will teach us to be more discerning about which digital technologies will embrace. So that is all about this article. Now, this article is about vaccine skirmishes. IPR waiver will not bring immediate benefits. The effort must be to share the stockpile. So, this article is also about IPR waiving off from the vaccines or COVID-19 vaccines. But here, the emphasis on in this article is on not on the waiving off from the waiving off IPR from the vaccines, but efforts need to be make or need to efforts must be made to share the stockpile by the developed countries. So context is that Biden administration's announcement that it would support a waiver on intellectual property rights for the production of COVID-19 vaccines appeared to catch the world off guard on both the sides of the argument. Original proposal for the relaxation of trips for such vaccines in the context of the ongoing pandemic had been drafted at the WTO by India and South Africa last year. Months before it was tabled during 2020 US presidential election, erstwhile candidate Joe Biden vowed that he should win, and he would absolutely positively commit to sharing vaccine technology with countries that needed it, perhaps anticipating the deep chasm of inequality in vaccine access. So when he was a candidate for a US election, he said that after winning the election, he will drive out vaccine technology with countries who all are needed it. Okay, so he will share the vaccine technology. So here it is not about supporting USA is supporting to IPR waiver, but USA's leader or presidential candidate has said that USA under his administration is going to share technology with other countries on vaccines, who all countries are required. So perhaps anticipating the deep chasm of inequality in vaccine access. So now that his administration has proclaimed its intent to fulfill that promise, and it must come as a bitter realization that what sounds like a well-intentioned pro-developing countries policy stance that has been rebuffed by major European Union nations and met with counter suggestions that might even make the most liberal US Democrats comfortable. First pushback salvo came from Germany, which said that it would create severe complications for the production of vaccines that echoes the view of major pharma corporations. While French President Emmanuel Macron had appeared relatively less hostile to considering the proposal earlier, he lashed out at the Anglo-Saxons for impending vaccine availability globally by blocking the export of ingredients. So there are merits to the argument that IPR waiver, even if it were to become a reality, may not entirely resolve the vaccine deficit issue in countries suffering the worst of the pandemic now. First, the grant of a waiver would have to be accompanied by a tech transfer that provides generic pharmaceutical manufacturers with the requisite trained personnel, raw materials, and high-tech equipment and production know-how. So these need to be shared with all such countries who are in the need right now. Second, There must be scientifically convincing answers to the questions of how any vaccine then produced by these generic manufacturers in all likelihood years from now would pass the would pass the test of safety, immunogenicity, and protective efficacy. It means its efficacy also need to be examined. So first is sharing of knowledge, and second is how effective these vaccines would be, which had been manufactured earlier, which had been manufactured years ago. Okay. Third, impact on global supply chains for vaccine production should be examined so major disruptions might be avoided. So here, third point is supply chain. Finally, alternative options to urgently address vaccine shortfalls should be considered, including developed nations who shared a significantly greater part of their vaccine stockpiles, particularly in the cases where later exceeded projected domestic need. So indeed, there is speculations that intention behind Mr. Biden's waiver proclamation might be in favor of the last outcome, essentially a tactic to persuade pharmaceutical companies to accept less painful measures, which includes sharing some of their technology willingly, that agrees to joint ventures to increase global production expeditiously, and simply produce more doses at affordable prices to donate directly to where the need is most severe, especially India. So behind Biden's waiver proclamation, there might be in favor of the last outcome, which is tactic to persuade pharmaceutical companies. Okay, it means pharmaceutical companies need to be persuaded to accept less painful measures that includes sharing some of their technology willingly. It means these pharmaceutical companies working in USA, they need to be persuaded that they should share their technology of vaccine. Then they should agree to joint ventures to increase global productions expeditiously. Okay, joint ventures with India so that manufacturing of vaccines can be taken place in India, and simply produce more doses at affordable price. So price affordability is required to donate directly to where the need is most severe. So India, especially India, is required vaccination because India is second highest populated country of the world. So many people, they need to get vaccinated, but because of shortage of vaccination, we are not able to provide. Government is not able to provide vaccines on time. So we are shortening in the manufacturing because we are shortening in the raw material of the vaccine manufacture because we do not have any rights to do that. So we have to be dependent on USA for this. So USA has agreed to it that they are going to send raw material. But here, stockpile what these countries are having, if vaccination has been done in the country, for example, USA, they need to share those stockpiles. They need to work as soon as possible to share technology to provide these vaccinations at affordable prices. Then joint ventures can be step in India. So these measures need to be taken as soon as possible to defeat COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so that is all about this article. Next article, that is about National Health Service in India. It is time to revive a plan that is modeled on the British National Health Service. So this article is about that health service in or National Health Service in India that has proved to be a failure. Many shortcomings are there. So here, this is the right time that we need to revive a plan, and we need to model National Health Service on the line of British National Health Service. So context is that the current surge in COVID-19 infections has exposed problems amounting to near chaos throughout Indian healthcare, even if the pandemic has also brought to light Herculean attempts by medical staff, patients' families, and governments to try and cope with what has been called a tsunami, one which is rapidly getting worse. So while those involved in the clinical response are clearly doing their often desperate best, care staff are at high risk of contracting COVID-19. Central and state governments are now coordinating measures within and across their respective jurisdictions. For example, railways are running special trains which is carrying oxygen supplies. Military is also involved in supply chains. Karnataka government has ordered private hospitals above a certain size to reserve 75% seats of their beds for COVID-19 patients who will be paid for under a public scheme. Other states have taken similar measures, like Supreme Court has taken suo motu, which is called for a national plan to deliver oxygen and vaccines. The responses to the worsening COVID-19 crisis are nevertheless not free of tensions. Some private healthcare providers they have objected to public authorities, orders on widened patient access, and Supreme Court's call for a national supply plan has been publicly criticized in the political sphere. Some of the problems have occurred on previous occasions. At least one private hospital chain has lost a court action over its failure to treat a government specified quota for of poorer patients. That quota was a condition of help with land allocation to build a hospital. So, current crisis may well redirect national attention to what is only barely recognizable as a system of healthcare. India's fragmented, often corrupt, urban centered, elite focused, and wretchedly underfunded agglomeration of clinics, hospitals, and variably functional primary health centers that can look like no more than an accidental collection of these institutions, staffs, and services. India's public spending on health is set to double in 2021-22 financial year, but that is from a figure that has been long only a little over 1% of GDP. So here, government need to spend more to improve health services in the country. So in certain rural areas, doctor population ratio is over 1 to 40,000 India's healthcare providers. However, they have the task of serving 1.4 billion people, for the overwhelming majority of whom sickness or serious injury or any kind is a matter of lifelong dread. Medical expenses that constitute major reasons for personal debt in India, whether the causes are episodic afflictions or, for example, those caused by environmental conditions like none can escape, like air pollution, which journal Lancet Planetary Health says this accounted for 1.7 million deaths in India in 2019. The annual business cost of air pollution is currently estimated at $95 billion. That is about 3% of India's GDP. So we need to have a national health services as the solution to these problems. What we discussed. So in effect, COVID-19 may bring about serious consideration of an Indian national health service. National public discussions of that would be almost unprecedented in India. But idea itself is not new. In 1946, civil servant Sir Joseph Bohr submitted to the then government a detailed proposal for a national health service broadly modeled on the British National Health Service or NHS, which was on the way forward legislative approval in Britain. Bohr went further by recommending that preventive and curative medicines be integrated at all levels. That is British National Health System or services. So British plan had been drafted in the 1930s as problems worsened in the healthcare services. The fact of the Second World War, in the darkest hours of which a plan was prepared to transform Britain into a post war social democracy with a comprehensive welfare state and a universal free public health service that supports a mixed economy, may therefore have been catalytic rather than decisive in the creation of the national health services. So, result is a mighty achievement in public policy, politics, and provisions of top class universal healthcare, which includes training, research, and changing engagement with the public as society changes. Services that is funded entirely from general taxation. Budget includes payment to general practitioners, most of whom remain private providers, but they are paid by the state for treating National Health Service patients. Items which are listed in general practitioners' prescriptions incur no charges in the devolved regions of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and in practice, only a proportion of patients in England have to pay a prescribed items. So all hospital treatments and medicines are free and are outpatient and follow-up appointments. British public share the cost through their taxes and almost without exception that receives treatment solely according to their clinical needs. So with about 1.1 million staff, National Health Service is the largest employer in United Kingdom. Its current budget is about 7.6% of GDP, but despite its size and scale, it provides highly localized access to care. So there are problems in national health services as well. So of course problem has arisen. Among them are largely unintended inequalities in the time and attention given to patients of different social classes. This discovery resulted in substantial changes, huge and frequent reorganizations which imposed by central government and often ideologically driven underfunding. Nevertheless, many senior hospital consultants who were opposed to a public health service when National Health Service started have declared unreserved support for it in at least one National Health Conference or National Conference resolution. An authority on National Health Service has said that it is the most loved and trusted institutions in the country and is held in even higher regard than the monarchy. India now faces a very serious health crisis, possibly the worst since independence. By all accounts, several areas of Indian healthcare provision are under severe strain. The precise structure envisaged by Bohr may need some adaptations for today's society and conditions, but dealing effectively with the pandemic may itself require the urgent creation of an Indian National Health Service. So, because of the pandemic, where India is falling in short to provide health services freely to its people, we need to adopt British model of national health service. That is requirement or urgent creation to have Indian national health services to deal with the problem of pandemic. Next article, that is about not all crises are opportunities for reforms. The call for reforms today leaves out the stakeholders, which might undermine the very purpose of reforms. So here, every opportunity is not, every crisis are not opportunities for reform. So context is that this is Context is that this year marks 30 years of landmark economic reforms that permanently altered the production and distribution structures of the Indian economy. That swayed by the success of 1991 reforms, albeit at the macroeconomic level. There has been a growing clamor from economic commentators for some more doses of reforms in 2021. Both 1991 and 2021 have one thing in common: an economy facing a severe growth crisis. This raises two fundamental questions. First, is crisis a prerequisite for reforms? Second, given the magnitude of economic contraction in 2021, are reforms capable of rejuvenating the economy, or will they push the economy towards growth fatigue? So the situation what we are facing economically today, that we had already faced 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, a landmark economic reforms that had taken that permanently altered the production and distribution structures of Indian economy. So 2021 is not seen as similar as the situation was in 1991. So two questions have been rising, okay, by seeing all such commonalities, that economy is facing growth crisis. So that has raised two questions. First, if crisis is a prerequisite for reforms, and second, the magnitude of economic contraction in 2021, are reforms capable of rejuvenating the economy, or will they push the economy towards growth fatigue? So whether it will push rejuvenation of the economy, or it will push the economy towards growth fatigue. So problems in big bang policy reform. So it is not very common to deport or depart from initiating incremental policy changes to making fundamental shifts in economic policy. Big bang policy reforms often face hurdles in terms of rules and routines. By overcoming these requires efforts and conviction. Crises that provide opportunities for radical changes as they break down the legitimacy of existing policy approaches. Crises thus create a space for new proposals and possibilities which could have far reaching consequences for the economy and society. Viewed from a sectoral perspective, during a crisis, the services delivered by some sectors do not meet societal expectations, which in turn sets the stage for institutional reforms to enhance the credibility and legitimacy of those sectors. For the policymakers, crisis can generate increased demand for change that could be the opportunity for which they would have been waiting. So, not all crises create conditions for widespread acceptance of reforms, as they could generate other byproducts. Thus, to posit a linear causal relationship between crisis and reforms could be erroneous. Crises cause the breakdown of established structures that leads to instability. They create uncertainty as the prevailing behavior and choices of actors change. This combination of uncertainty and instability sets the stage for a reorientation of policies packaged and delivered under the banner of reforms. The argument for converting a crisis into an opportunity to reform arises due to three factors. These factors are: first, during crisis, group relations and modes of interaction changes that sets a suitable background for change. Second, at the time of crisis, authority replaces rules that makes it easier to push the policies in a short span time. Third, during periods of crisis, legitimacy of prevailing rules and routines diminishes. That makes it easier for actors to depart from them. So, character and consequences of the crisis of 1991 and 2021 are different. In 1991, crisis of the economy was the product of endogenous factors, that is, factors which was operating within the economic system. Crisis of 2021 is different as it is the product of a pandemic, and this is exogenous to the economic system. Cause and effect relations are entirely different in the latter, as the cause originates from outside the economic system and economy is forced to adjust to this external shock. Further, in 1991, the crisis was limited to the Indian economy, while the present calamity has engulfed most global economies with varying intensities. That makes policy responses very challenging. In the former case, we could have India's specific policies, which assumes that there would not be drastic changes in the rest of the world. And in the later cases, India's specific policies will have to be tempered with the dynamics of the rest of the world, as all affected economies are formulating policy responses at the same time. So, the availability of semi fixed template for reforms that eased the matter in 1991, template which had some generic measures for all the economies that experiencing external sector imbalances, was a tried and tested one. Policymakers had some headroom to anticipate the likely consequences in the post implementation phase. So in 2021, challenge is to evolve a country-specific package. Two uncertainties pose serious problems in charting such a set of measures. First is the uncertainty with regard to the government's own revenues, which would limit the policy space for interventions. Expenditure reduction is not a viable strategy for expanding the scale and scope of policies in a situation of demand contraction due to the pandemic. Second is the unpredictability of global factors, as India's dependence on the global economy increased manifold after the 1991 reforms. So, both these have the potential to jeopardize the effective implementation of strategic changes. Magnitude and intensity of the crisis of 2021 is manifold compared to that of 1991. There is also a lag effect in the unraveling of the scale and extent of the crisis that is surfacing slowly, accounts for nearly 60% of the global increase in poverty. Perhaps not surprisingly, media reports from India point to a spike in participation in its rural employment program, originally which intended to combat poverty in agriculture areas, as many who have lost their jobs in the reeling economy seek work. For example, Manrega. Number now participating in the setting record is high in the program's 14-year history. Enormity of the crisis is appropriately captured in the research that has cited above, which throws light on the circumstances of 2021 and its non suitability as a year for radical reforms. All the crises do not inevitably lead to possibilities for reforms, even though some do create opportunities for fundamental changes. So, to gauge whether a crisis can be turned into an opportunity for reforms requires an in depth understanding of the factors that led to the crisis. Further, all the three clusters of actors which are crucial agents in the policy process, political leaders, policymakers, and implementers, are and the relevant stakeholders, they need to have a shared vision. In 2021, call for reforms leaves out the stakeholders, which might undermine the very purpose of the reforms itself. That is all about this article. Next article is about how to adopt a child legally. During a crisis, an outreach program must warn everyone not to entertain any illegal adoption offers. So during this crisis, an outreach program is required that give a warning to all such people who are entertaining illegal adoption offers. So context is that profiteering from child trafficking rackets knows no bounds. Today, some people are offering infants for instant adoption by selling sob stories of how children have lost their parents to the dreaded virus. These unscrupulous people target gullible persons who fall in the trap, little realizing that such adoptions are illegal. Lack of inputs for proper procedures for legal adoptions and hasty sentimental considerations are exploited for exorbitant sums of money. The times that call for tough measures, this businesses of criminal trading of children must be checked with an iron hand. So, according to UNICEF, India has over 30 million orphan and abandoned children, and unfortunate parental deaths added unknown numbers of orphans to the list. Many children who escaped monitoring by the official machineries due to breakdown of the system. Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children law was enacted in 2015. Juvenile Justice Rules of 2016 and Adoption Regulations of 2017 that followed to create Central Adoption Resource Authority had as a statutory body for the regulation, monitoring, and control of all intra-country and inter-country adoptions. Further, CARA became pivotal in granting a no objection certificate for all inter-country adoptions, pursuant to India becoming a signatory to the Hague Convention on Protection of Children and cooperation in respect of inter-country adoptions. India is also a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Thus, protections afforded to children became a legal mandate for all authorities and courts. Laws had been enacted, machineries and mechanisms created were put in place. Juvenile Justice Act is a secular law. All persons are free to adopt children under this law. However, persons professing Hindu religion are free to adopt under Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act of 1956. Rehabilitation of all orphaned, abandoned, and surrendered children is regulated by the strict mandatory procedures of adoption regulations. Children of relatives can also be adopted under Juvenile Justice Act if they desire. So only such children declared legally free for adoption under the Juvenile Justice Act by prescribed procedures can be adopted. Any person or organization offering or receiving such children for adoption in violation of the Juvenile Justice Act and adoption regulations invites punishment up to 3 years and a fine of rupees 1 lakh or both. So, what are the eligibility of adoptive parents living in India? So, eligibility and prospective adoptive parents living in India duly registered on child adoption resources, information, and guidance system that is caring, irrespective of marital status and religion, is adjudged by specialized adoption agencies preparing home study reports. So, upon approval as per seniority in the adoption list, prospective children are offered and pre adoption foster care follows. The specialized adoption agencies then secures court orders which approves the adoption. All non-resident persons they can approach authorized adoption agencies in their foreign country of residence for registration under carings. Their eligibility is adjudged by authorized foreign adoption agencies through home study reports. As per seniority, they are offered profiles of children and child study reports are finalized. So CARA then issues a pre-adoption no objection certificate for foster care that is followed by a court adoption order. Finally, no objection certificate from CARA or a conformity certificate under adoption convention is mandatory for a passport and visa to leave India. Not many may know this. CARA must conduct an approach program, an outreach program on social media, newspapers, and TV that warning everyone not to entertain any illegal adoption which offers under any circumstance whatsoever. The legal process of adoption must be adequately publicized. The national and state commissions for protection of child rights must step up their roles as vigilantes, as they are empowered by law to take effective action against those engaging in illegal activities. Social activists, NGOs, and enlightened individuals must report all the incidents that come to their notice. Respective state legal services authorities have infrastructure and machinery to stamp out such unlawful practices that had been brought to their attention. Media must publicize and shame all those involved in this disruptible occupation. Innocent children deprived of the love and care of their natural parents due to tragedies that cannot fall prey to traders of human smuggling. And at the same time, police authorities need to be extra vigilant in apprehending criminals. A joint private public venture must come into motion. Every citizen of the nation has a role to play in eradicating this unhealthy practice. So, this is all about this article. There are many illegalities in the adoption of children. For example, child trafficking, pornography, children can be used for this. So, just to prevent it, what all procedures every parent need to follow. So, that has been mentioned here. That we have discussed over here. Okay, so that is all about this article. Next article is about the crime of enforced disappearance must end. Cases, especially in Asia, are not decreasing, with domestic criminal law system insufficient to deal with this atrocity. Context is that democracy movement in Myanmar is at a crucial juncture. On 1st February 2021, military launched a coup d'etat to overthrow the democratically elected government led by Aung San Suu Kyi's party, that is National League for Democracy. Military is committed to suppressing the people's movement, and police are carrying out unimaginable acts of violence and oppression against those demanding freedom of expression and restoration of democracy. So enforced disappearance, this is one of the examples which is going on in Asia. So there are many enforced disappearances in Asia. Since the COP, the United Nations Working Group on Enforced and or Involuntary Disappearance, that is WGEID, that has received reports of enforced disappearances from family members of victims. There is concern that there will be a plethora of cases of enforced disappearances like torture, arbitrary detention, and even murder if situation continues to deteriorate. So Myanmar is not the only country in Asia that enforced disappearance are becoming a major concern. There are other leaders and regimes that have mistaken notion that they can do anything to maintain their power. Regretfully, this includes using enforced disappearances as a tool to suppress the people. In China, working group has received numerous reports from family members and concerned civil society organizations that a massive number of enforced disappearances have occurred in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Under the pretext of re-education to prevent terrorism, members of the Uyghur minority ethnic group are forcibly sent to what Chinese authorities call vocational education and training centers, with no limitations on their whereabouts and fate given to their families. The working group chair has met many people from the region who are trying to find out what happened to their family members, and they are living in fear. It is especially concerning because the basis for such forced disappearances is often very trivial. For example, having relatives living abroad or maintaining international contacts could lead to an enforced disappearance. Residential surveillance at a designated location under Article 73 of the amended Criminal Procedure Law is used against individuals accused of endangering state security and is another issue of serious concerns. So, because of residential surveillance at designated location places individuals under incommunicado detention without disclosing their whereabouts. It may amount to a form of enforced disappearance. Sri Lanka has experienced more than 3 decades of domestic conflict, which has accompanied by various forms of enforced disappearances. And it seems that there was some hope which developed becoming that hope developing because of efforts by government to confront its history. So recently, government is weakening initiatives it previously started to search for and investigate enforced disappearances and has now returned to promoting a culture of impunity for these crimes. It is also disheartening to point out that enforced disappearances are being committed in the name of counterterrorism measures. Increasing numbers of enforced disappearances are being reported in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and it does not seem that situation will improve in the near future. Enforced disappearances became widely known to the world in the 1970s and early 1980s during the Dirty War in Argentina, where Argentine military dictatorship committed the forceful disappearances of some 30,000 of its own citizens while denying that they kidnapped, tortured, and murdered them. To fight against these gross and systematic human rights violations, UN Commission on Human Rights established the Working Group in 1980 as the first special procedure mechanism of the UN Commission on Human Rights. And enforced disappearance is defined by several constituent elements. First, it is characterized by deprivation of liberty, where persons are arrested, detained, or abducted against their will or otherwise deprived of their liberty. Second, there are grounds for seeking governmental responsibility for the act, including of officials of different branches or levels of government or by organized groups or private individuals acting on behalf of or with the support, direct or indirect consent or acquiescence of the government. Third, such an act typically occurs in the context of a state's continuous refusal to take relevant action, which includes refusal to disclose the fate or whereabouts of the persons who concerned or refusal to acknowledge the deprivation of their liberty, which places such persons outside the protection of the law. Then protection of the people is required. Under Declaration of the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance in 1992, Working Group works to assist families of disappeared persons to ascertain the fate and whereabouts of the disappeared and assist and monitor states compliance. Additionally, with the assistance of the Secretariat members, which is based in Geneva, Working Group monitors states compliance and documented cases of enforced disappearance. Working Group receives individual petitions from victims, families, and civil society members and channels them through the relevant governments to demand searches for the disappeared persons, investigations, and punishment for those responsible. WGID also presses states to offer remedies, including compensation and guarantee of non recurrence of the violation. Since its inception, Working Group has transmitted a total of 58,606 cases to 109 states, and as of 2020, the number of outstanding cases under active consideration stood at 46,271 in a total of 92 states. Unfortunately, the number of cases of enforced disappearances in Asian states is not decreasing, and we are seeing a rapid increase in some countries. Working Group has serious concerns about the impact of COVID-19 on enforced disappearances. Not only have enforced disappearances continued during the pandemic, but it has generated new context for enforced disappearances and has reduced the capacity of all actors to take the necessary action to search for and investigate cases of disappeared persons. Ratification on convention. So to protect the right to be free from enforced disappearance, international community adopted international convention for the protection of all the persons from enforced disappearance in 2006 that became effective in 2010. However, the number of participating states is still very low as compared to other treaties. Among 63 member states of the treaty, only 8 states from the Asia Pacific region have ratified or acceded to the treaty. Only 4 East Asian states like Cambodia, Japan, Mongolia, and Sri Lanka have ratified it. Asian countries, they should consider their obligations and responsibilities more seriously and reject a culture of impunity in order to eradicate enforced disappearances. They should also understand that their domestic criminal law system are not sufficient to deal with the crime of enforced disappearance. And enforced disappearance is a continuous crime that needs a comprehensive approach to fight against it. While working as an expert UN Human Rights Council's working group for the past 5 years, that understand that one of the most tragic dimensions of the crime of enforced disappearance is the suffering that is inflicted on the people who know the victims. So, enforced disappearance is a serious crime that goes against the philosophy of humanity. The pain and suffering of the family members do not end until they find out the fate or whereabouts of their loved ones. Bottles of water and facial tissues should always be readily available when interviewing the family members of the disappeared persons because their stories cannot be told without tears. Mothers looking for sons, wives looking for husbands, and children looking for parents demonstrate that endless chain of tragedy in our contemporary world. This human atrocity must end immediately. Hopefully, the international community will strengthen its efforts to eradicate enforced disappearance as soon as possible. That is all about this article. Next article is about reforming medical education. An unfettered market approach is not the answer to the health workforce crisis. Context is that India's health system that have been confronting numerous challenges. In order to effectively address these challenges, our health systems must be strengthened. One of the critical building blocks of the health system is human resources. Serious shortage of health workers, especially doctors in some northern states, is a major impediment for achieving the workers, for achieving the health related sustainable development goals. Health workers, they are critical not just for the functioning of the health system, but also for the preparedness of the health system in preventing, detecting, and responding to the threats that posed by diseases like COVID-19. So, if urgent action is not taken, shortage will amplify and health system will get further weakened. The workforce crisis has been aggravated by the imbalances within the country. For instance, the doctor population ratio in northern states is far short of the required norm, while southern states, barring Telangana, have enough doctors in possession. There is also a general lack of adequate staffing in rural areas. So, unaddressed health problems. So these health system challenges will remain largely unaddressed while the government's market oriented approach towards medical education. There is no denying that in order to meet significant shortfall of qualified doctors in northern states, that scale up of medical education is warranted. Certain proposals like Niti Aayog's proposal of allowing private entities to take over district hospitals for converting them into teaching hospitals with at least 150 MBBS seats may sound attractive, but there are reasons to be deeply concerned. It means Niti Aayog has given a proposal to improve the doctor population ratio. And what is the proposal? Proposal is that private entities uh, need to take over district hospitals and convert them into teaching hospitals with 150 MBBS seats. So, through the implementation of such a policy, private sector in medical education will be encouraged, and it will also directly aid the corporatization processes of healthcare provisioning, while the under-resourced public health system will be a collateral damage. District hospitals are considered as the last resort for the poor, and this will change. The corporatization will make the services very costly and exclude them from getting care. Even from the perspective of producing more doctors to meet the shortages in undeserved areas, this is unlikely to yield the desired result. Private players treat medical education as a business. It would shut the door on a large number of medical aspirants who could otherwise have a strong motivation to work in rural areas, but they do not have means to finance themselves. Additionally, medical graduates trained in such private sectors, managed medical colleges, will prefer to find employment in corporate hospitals and not in the rural areas to regain their investment. Further, this proposal is not aligned with India's national health policy goals like achieving universal health care and health equality. Instead, it will hidden health inequalities further. Solving doctor shortage therefore need long-term thinking and commitment from the political leadership. Government should learn from previous cases of private public partnership in the past, contrary to the expectations that markets would help increasing access to primary and tertiary care for the poor through private players. The evidence supporting their effectiveness is very limited. So, in fact, many public private partnership had to be shelved owing to the non compliance of the agreement conditions by the private sector, under which they were also supposed to cater to the non paying patients. So, unfettered market approach or a regulated market with medical colleges that are publicly funded but privately operated provides competition for traditional government medical colleges is not the answer to the health workforce crisis. Medical education is a public good as its purpose is to improve the population health and decrease disease burden. Pandemic has provided us an opportunity to make medical education a public good once again. There should be a substantial step up in public investment in medical education. By establishing new medical colleges, the government can increase student intake as well as enhance equitable access to medical education. Besides, it must allocate adequate financial resources to strengthen the overall capacity of existing medical colleges to enrich student learning and improve output. So, here, to improve doctor population, we need to have good number of doctors. We need to create good number of doctors. We need to have more colleges, whether private or public. We need to create more colleges so that we can get more and more mbbs doctors who can and other healthcare staffs. So improvement on so that can also be done if financial resources can be improved, if funding can be improved to strengthen their capacity of existing medical college, which enrich students learning and improve the output. Okay, so that is all about this article. Next article is about lend a helping hand to children the right way. Following the COVID surge, laws and procedures for the care and protection of orphan children must be noted. So, context is the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic now sweeping India has left many children orphaned and vulnerable. Social media is flooded with requests to adopt children who have lost their parents in the pandemic, and few non-governmental organizations have come forward to help such children. So, before handing over an orphan child to any agency, family, or person, well intended move may be important to be aware of the laws that are prevalent and procedures with regard to the care and the protection of the orphan children, rather than face legal action for violations later. It means before handling to these children to any other age, to any other people or family member, we need to go through the legal procedure so that if violation would be there, that can be curbed earlier, not later on. Okay, so protection to children, any individual who finds an orphan child or even any child who needs care and protection under circumstances should immediately call the toll free childline number, that is 1098. That is an emergency phone outreach service which is managed by Women and Child Development Department's nodal agency, the Childline India Foundation, that operates around the day and all the days across the country. After taking note of the whereabouts of the child, helpline reaches out immediately and takes charges of the child. These childline units are nothing but civil society organizations duly approved by the government. Second option is to intimate the district protection officer concerned, whose contact details can be found on the National Tracking System for Missing and Vulnerable Children portal, which is maintained by Women and Child Development Department of the Government of India. Third alternative is to approach the nearest police station or its child welfare police officer who is specially trained to exclusively deal with children either as victims or juvenile delinquents. Nonetheless, one can always dial the emergency response support system, which is a pan India single number, which is based emergency response system for citizens in emergencies, and seek the necessary help. Non-reporting of such children is also a punishable offense under Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Children Act 2015. So safeguards which is given to orphan children. Once an orphan child is recovered by the outreach agency, it is the duty of the said agency to produce the child within 24 hours before the welfare committee of the district. This child welfare committee, after an inquiry, decides whether to send the child to a children's home or fit facility or fit person. If child is below 6 years, he or she shall be placed in a specialized adoption agency. State thus takes care of all such children who are in need of care and protection till they turn 18 years. In Sampurna Behrua versus Union of India 2018, Supreme Court of India directed states and union territories to ensure that all child care institutions are registered. Thus, any voluntary or NGO which is not registered as per the requirement of Justice Juvenile Act cannot house children in the need of care and protection. Once a child is declared legally free from adoption by the Child Welfare Committee, adoption can be done either by Indian prospective adoptive parents for non-resident Indians or foreigners in that order. So another important features of Justice Juvenile Act is that it is secular in nature and simple in procedure as compared to the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act 1956, which is not only religion specific but also relatively cumbersome in procedure. Second, procedure of adoption is totally transparent and its progress can be monitored from the portal of the statutory body, Central Adoption Resource Authority. So it is quite often said that ignorance of the law is not an excuse. And therefore, if an orphan child is kept by someone without lawful authority, he or she may land themselves in trouble. According to the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act 1956, father and in his absence mother is the natural guardian. Not even a close relative can look after the child without authorization. Supreme Court in Bachpan Bachao Andolan versus Union of India directed all directors general of police in May 2013 to register a first information report as a case of trafficking or abduction in every case of a missing child. At least one police officer not below the rank of assistant sub-inspector in each police station is mandatorily required to undergo training to deal with children in conflict with the law and in need for care and protection. They are not required to wear a uniform and need to be child friendly. Similarly, each district is supposed to have its special juvenile police point, headed by an officer not below the rank of Deputy Superintendent of Police. Supreme Court in re-exploitation of children in orphanages in the state of Tamil Nadu. Inter alia specifically asked the National Police Academy, Hyderabad, and police training academics in every state to prepare training courses on the Justice Juvenile Act and provide regular training to police officers in terms of sanitization. Children are an important national asset and well-being of the nation, and its future depend on how its children grow and develop. Primary purpose of giving a child in adoption is his welfare and restoring his or her right to family. Article 39 of the Constitution prohibits the tender age of the children from being abused. Therefore, orphan children who have lost both their parents or abandoned or surrendered due to COVID-19 pandemic must not be neglected and left to face an uncertain future. They must be taken care of by the authorities entrusted with responsibilities under the Justice Juvenile Act. So, this is all about the article, and this is all about the day. All such important articles I have discussed in today's session. So, I think it is helpful for you. And if any doubts would be there, you can ask in the next session. So, thank you so much. Have a nice day. Have a nice Sunday. Bye bye.